welcome to this final installment of Black Lives Matter at SJDK. On this episode, you will hear from Father Mark Williams, Father Nick Quanrud, Church Warden Venessa Denny, and Father Sebastian Harries. Recording this, it was so wonderful to be joined by those leading at our church, and to hear from them how central racial justice is to the call of God's kingdom. Here is that conversation. Well, thank you all so much for joining me. Could we just start off with some introductions? Just say who you are and what you do at St. John the Divine, or how you're connected to the church.
I'm Father Mark, and I'm the Vicar of St. John the Divine, and I've been here it was 10 years last January, so it's coming up to 11 years now.
Great.
I'm Father Nick. I'm the assistant curate here, and I've been here for 18 months.
Hi, I'm Venessa Denny. I am the church warden and thereafter at St. John Divine Kennington, and I have been going to this church since I was a child with a break in between.
I'm Father Seb, and I'm the chaplain at our parish secondary school, St. Gabriel's College, and I'm also assistant priest at St. John the Divine, and I've been here just coming up to 2 years.
Brilliant. Well, it's so good to have you all on and to join this podcast series. I thought we might just start off by coming to this last episode of the series. If people had any responses to things that stood out for them in any of the previous episodes.
Yes, I've been struck by a number of things, actually, listening to the series. Struck by the kind of unanimous desire for change from everyone that we've heard interviewed. And not just that, but I'm struck by everyone's willingness to embody that change as well. Their sort of can-do attitude and their sense of responsibility, where actually lots of them have really been wronged in lots of the things that they describe. I've been completely inspired and bowled over by the faith of those who continue to worship in a church which at one time, as someone said, wouldn't even give them communion. I think that takes a particular depth of faith, which I've been completely amazed and inspired by.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with Nick. And the resilience of people, when you think of Daddy John's generation and Miss Ruby and Linda and Pam, the resilience that they stuck at it really is completely extraordinary. And what witnesses they are as Christian people. It was encouraging to hear with the younger generation, the Black Lives Matter generation, that they had rather different experiences and that things had moved on somewhat, but there's clearly an enormous amount still to do.
Mm.
Yeah, it was a real privilege to listen to people's stories. And both just to hear, how appalling it is that the things that they faced are shocking, but at the same time aren't shocking because they're so commonplace. But also going on from what Father Mark and Father Nick were saying, that hasn't sort of stopped them, that somehow still they have an incredible joy and incredible, I would say, graciousness towards the church, and also graciousness towards a society that has treated them so badly, and have continued to go forward in such a sort of a generous way that somehow they've still been able to go forward with such generous hearts, which I think is really something. I don't think there's many people that would be able to do that. So it was a real privilege to hear their stories.
I think it's really interesting what you point out, Father Seb, about that graciousness that people are showing towards the church itself when the church has been wrapped up in doing wrong. So I wonder what what your thoughts, all of you, are as why it's important that we address racial justice in our church.
Well, it's absolutely fundamental to our faith as Christians. For goodness sake, we're all made in the image of God, and we're all equal in the sight of God. And anything else is just rubbish, really. And we just can't allow racial injustice to continue. St. Paul also talks about us being the body of Christ, and if part of that body is hurting, we're all hurting. So there's a deeply theological and biblical imperative for us to grasp things and to not let go. Because there have been efforts in the past, but people lose enthusiasm and lose energy, and we're back to square one again, or it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But we can't allow that to happen anymore.
Yeah, and I think also a sort of if our understanding of sin is that when we sin against someone else and against God, we also diminish who we're created to be. We harm ourselves in that, and we become less human, less who God has created us and called us into be. Resisting this sort of sin of racism is also about being more fully alive as who we are, being more fully as who God has called us to be. It isn't just a thing of needing to match certain criteria for modern society. It's really a divine call that we have.
Right. Venessa, we've heard throughout this podcast series people's experiences as Black people in the church and their experiences of race. I wonder if you had any reflections of what your personal experience is.
So I feel like the issue of the church is an institution. It's structural. Locally, as an individual, I would say that I don't necessarily feel racism in my direct church. I think there's inequality in different ways. So there are divisions. But again, I think that happens when you have so many different people in a space that people naturally cluster and they have their prejudice. That's just how we are as human beings. But the church as an institution, for me personally, is where the issue of not just racism, but inclusion and diversity really, really struggle. Being Black and being female, I see that quite starkly. Having friends that who are not heterosexual, I see that quite starkly. And I feel like the way the church as an institution, the way the structures of the church work, it has consistently excluded people more than included people. And I believe, I've always gone to my church and I've always felt welcome, but other people's stories across United Kingdom is very, very different. How they've been treated, very, very different. And they've felt racism in their churches. I haven't. I feel like St. John Divine Kennington has been warm, it's been welcoming, it's gone through different stages. However, at the same time, I would say, for example, I think I'll probably jump into another question here, but our schools, the leadership of our schools doesn't reflect necessarily our parish. The leadership of our local church doesn't reflect our parish. So there are things that make you question how come some people can get there and up in the structure and others don't, and consistently don't.
Father Seb, I wondered if you had any thoughts picking up on what Venessa said about our schools and what our school leadership looks like around why it's important to take up this issue of racial justice.
I think it's so important because I remember one teacher saying to me, actually, one of the reasons sometimes parents might be wary of engaging with our schools sometimes is because when they turn to the leadership, then they see people from very, very different backgrounds and people who don't look like them, and immediately there's some sort of disconnect. There's that sense that, well, are the people in the leadership of the school, do they really understand where we're coming from and who we are? And so I think what's so important for people to feel comfortable and welcomed in their schools is having people that do understand who they are and where they're coming from. So I think it's something that needs huge change right across this, huge structural change, because I think these things can't happen overnight. What has to happen is the next generation of children need to be brought up believing that actually, yes, they can be in the leadership in schools, and actually that it is very, very much for them. But unfortunately, it's not just the schools that sort of have in the past instilled a sense of, for want of better terms, of hierarchy. It's also society as well. There's some people that have had it instilled in them from a very young age that there are certain things that they can't do in society, and that they're not for them, and that just cannot be the case. And it's not the case. I really believe that no matter what people's background, with the right help, because I think everyone needs help. It's not a case of people doing things on their own. People need help from society and institutions around them for them to be able to get to the places where they justly deserve to be.
I agree with Father Seb. I think one of the issues is those institutions, those pillars, whether it's the church or the police, the NHS, the educational systems, they are steeped in racism, they're steeped in classes, and they're steeped in even sexism. There's a lot there in those institutions, and the people that control those institutions, I'm not convinced that they want the change. And it's very hard to try and break into that hierarchy to make the change, especially if you're a lone ranger. And I think that's where the biggest struggle is. Those that have the power to make decisions, to release budgets and money, to understand actually how it feels to be on the other side, they don't have that empathy or understanding sometimes. And that's generation after generation for the masses. And I think that's where people locally, as much as we try and we fight for justice and equality and equity, the higher up you go in that hierarchy, and the hierarchy is everywhere. I mean, I think the church is quite hierarchical. I think education is quite hierarchical. This country is based on that kind of pyramid structure, but the higher up you go, the harder it is to change those rules, those regulations, and people don't want to relinquish their power either, and nor they don't want to seek to understand. So I agree with Father Step 100%, but there's a lot more further up, and the people further up don't have these type of conversations.
Mm-hmm. And just following what you're saying, Venessa, I think, this is why I think unconscious bias training is so important. It's not the kind of it's not the sort of magic wand that's going to just somehow change everything. But I do think there's plenty of people in positions of power and leadership who would say, oh, I haven't got a racist bone in my body, but they haven't really been able to look at themselves and challenge those things and realize the sort of unconscious messages that they've been brought up with, the realizing that actually, because they've always had that sort of, what should we say, head start because of a particular background they might have come from, they don't realize how the sort of odds have been stacked in their favor.
Agreed.
I think that's absolutely right. And I was saying this in my sermon the other day, that it's the kind of, it's actually the kind of well-meaning white liberals who think they're on the right side of things, on the side of the angels or whatever, that are very often perpetuating these unjust structures because they don't see it. They don't understand the barriers that are there. They don't have the concepts of how people are being held back and how access is being denied. But they think they're doing fine.
I think Charlene mentioned something right at the end of her podcast, which I thought was really important. For it was, a universal sort of point that actually we all have to look inside ourselves. That sort of change starts within, and look at our own prejudices. that every single human being has, no matter what, but looking at them particularly, in light of this conversation, particularly when it comes to race, and I say particularly for white people in positions of leadership, it's something that has to be sort of addressed, and we have to have those honest conversations, I suppose, with ourselves.
Mm. I mean, maybe if I put that question to you all and frame it in terms of how high do we set our sights in tackling racial injustice? Because the problem, as we've all kind of expressed and agreed, and as we've heard through this series, seems to be so structural and so gargantuan, and therefore in need of big structural changes to be addressed. And yet our power seems to be so limited. Where do we set our sights? Where's the realistic prospect for action?
I think we have to set our sights really high, but there's also, we have to do with what's in front of us and work within our own communities to make change. And I think that was said by various other people in the previous podcasts. And I think what Kumba said in the last one was very interesting, because she said that the issue is that we let our energy, we let the agenda of racial justice die down, and we can't let it die down. The thing is that we always need to keep this on the agenda. We need to be checking ourselves all the time. And yes, we've brought racial injustice into focus again as a result of the impetus this year with George Floyd's murder. But enthusiasm and interest is already waning. But we need to keep this on the agenda. We need to keep going. We need to keep the momentum up. And then, our sights will be on various levels, kind of local, wider community and national and international as well. But we need to just keep on talking about it and doing stuff, and not let this energy wane.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say something similar. I think our vision has to be of the heavenly city, of the purposes and what God is drawing us all to, which is Himself. And in order to participate in that fully, it's really to do that which we can, which in the time that God has given us to do it. And I think as a church, for us that might be nurturing young Black vocations. I think, you can't really underestimate how significant it is for us to have a female Black bishop in Bishop Rose in Dover. And you think about the sort of what that represents on a national or a diocesan level, or a level as the Church of England, and what it would mean for, one of our own young Black people to become a member of the priest and, maybe a bishop one day, if we don't get too far ahead of ourselves. But to really commit to ensuring that people who are gifted don't feel they have to miss out on any sort of opportunity because they don't feel they fit in culturally or because of the colour of their skin.
I was thinking of Martin Luther King Jr. and the Promised Land, which is a very high site to get to, and his dream of the Promised Land, and the fact that he didn't get there necessarily, but he left the path and a legacy for people to follow. And I agree with Father Mark in terms of, I think there are different levels and layers, and I also think there are different types of people that work at different levels and layers of those barriers. So that you need people on the ground that are local, that know the community, that can that has that kind of energy. But you also need somebody within the Church of England that has the same energy to challenge the system and to question and to rebuke at the same time. And then you need a representative in another country to do the same thing. And you would hope golden thread between the person at the very local level in the parish and the person internationally somewhere links together eventually to make that change. And I say that because since Kamala has become the Vice President-elect, I've personally seen more Black women on TV and adverts and films than I have in my whole life. And I'm like, that change, that for those young people, for people that are only 3 and 4, when they get to 10 and 11, that'll be normal to see different people on TV and adverts. For myself, I'm like, it took a nation and people to be brave to vote for somebody that maybe is not like them, to change the attitude of other people. Because when Kamala goes to China, it's a Black woman that's going to China, and you're going to have to speak to her because of her position of power. But the same people on the ground, so Stacey Abrams on the ground, had to do all that work to ensure that the person at the top gets there. So for me, the sites, like Papa Mark said, is at every single level, and it didn't have to be that joined up.
Yeah, thank you. So shall we go to that local level? I want to ask you all what it is that we are able to do as a church, at St. John the Divine, in our schools, in our local community. What is it that we're able to do, and what is it that we're concretely looking to do?
I think one of the key things is continuing to develop Black leadership in the church. And I mean, we've got some excellent younger adult members of the congregation who are, doing a lot of stuff and really engaged in the life of the parish and offering leadership as lay people. 10 years, when I celebrated my 10th anniversary as the parish priest here last January, I said I won't be happy until we've got some of our Black young people behind the altar saying Mass. That's something that we haven't managed to make much progress on in this parish in the last few years. And that is a source of regret to me. And I think we need to redouble our efforts to encourage Black vocations within our community and give a bit of a lead. And I think, to be fair to the Diocese of Southwark, they have made strides with Black vocations in the last 5 to 10 years.
Agreed, yeah.
There still is a lot of work to be done with young Black vocations, young Black men and women. The candidates coming forward are kind of tend to be from, not exclusively, but tend to be from an older generation. And as you said, that the vocations within our own congregation, amongst some of our teenagers and people in their 20s and into their 30s, are plain to see. You could just tell they'd be fantastic priests. And we need to make a lot more effort to support them into realizing their vocations.
I thought it was really important to hear in our first episode, John Denny talking about the possibility of nurturing vocations from a very young age, and I guess somewhat lamenting that we seem to be able to take very young people in our community and nurture a vocation to be a footballer or work in the arts from a very young age, but it seems very difficult to do that when their vocation is in the church.
Yes, and I suppose also preparing people for, once you leave, where you're to be recommended and go after training, you leave St. John the Divine. Lots of the Church of England is very different from what it's like here. I mean, I've been here for 18 months, and I often tell people that where I was before, which was a very much majority white parish, and also where I was training, I don't think I ever had a single bite of hot food. Never mind, a glass of rum after church, like I might have at St. John the Divine. It's so different culturally. So I suppose also preparing people for that and giving them confidence in who they are and in their own vocations. I think there's lots of work for the church to do on that, to make people feel as though they're nationally deployable, which is a massive part of being called to be ordained. So I think the work to be done is massive. I think what we can do is to encourage people that they are able to do it, that they have to see that and to recognize that within themselves, their own strength of vocation.
I wonder, Venessa, did you have any thoughts about, I was just thinking, I mentioned the schools, but what that might look like in terms of the youth groups that you've been involved with, thinking of, young divinity and things like that?
Yeah, I think, I've left school a very long time ago, but I can't remember or recollect ever hearing the church as a place of, it sounds like say employment, but a place of employment or vocation. It's just an absent thing. Like, as far as the young people that I've mentored, and as far as my own living experience, it's like, okay, the church is RE and RE is church. And it's that simple, whilst you're doing the rest of the hustle and bustle of your life. And I agree with my dad in terms of how you sow the seed much younger, and understanding like you can be a lay person but still be involved in the church and still be a leader. You can pursue vocations, and having those what's the word I'm looking for? We as church leaders and we as a community need to help and harness the strength, like, because what Deacon Nick said is correct. To leave St. John's of Vine Kennington and go somewhere else that's very alien to you takes a lot of strength. And if you haven't got the resilience or the steadfastness, or you're not accustomed, or your mind is not open enough, because I think everybody assumes that if you go through vocation in the Diocese of Suffolk, that's it, you're going to stay in Suffolk, and that's not the case. And it's having been equipped with that in yourself, that steely resilience of, I am happy to go to Winchester and I may be the only Black person there, but I can do this because I have a community behind me. I have a community that I'm going to that will accept me, and that won't think I'm strange or won't question my food or if I have an accent or anything like that. They're going to be just as warm and welcoming. That there, you need to start that kind of feeling of assurance in the person from a very young age. I think even with my young people at 10, 11, they were gone by that time. They're like, no, Venessa, like a priest, hell no. And I'm like, you could work. But because as a young child and as a young teenager, you've got so many other external factors of the world taking that space. I love my dad to bits, but being a priest is not glamorous, right? You're competing with like somebody on the television and the amount of money. Like, there's so many external factors, but there are people that are also, if you nurture, because you can see, I feel anyway in my heart, I'm not a teacher, but I feel you can see a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old and say, you know what, that child, that person would be good for the church. That person would be good. We need that person, but we also then need to take the time as a community, the parents, the school, every aspect of that child's life to nurture those values, to become a priest or to become a lay person. Like, it's never discussed, even on like careers days. No one's discussing it. So it's just an absent void. And it's like those people are clergy and the rest of us are just these people that follow them because they're our spiritual leaders. And there's when do you have that conversation of, have you considered?
Yeah, and before the pandemic, we had a really excellent kind of beginning of a really excellent youth ministry, which Mother Helen Hartnett set up before she went off to be a vicar on the Old Kent Road, where we had students from St Gabriel's would come to our church hall and spend a couple of hours there playing games, whatever, and we'd have chicken and chips cooked and that sort of thing. And I think that was quite good for, in some ways, sort of demystifying a bit of what clergy are like, and that we can just have normal conversations with them and say, oh yeah, you know what, I like chicken and chips too, or I like football as well, or we can talk about this kind of stuff as well. We don't have to just talk about what you learned in RE today, so those sorts of things are really helpful, just to spend time with people, just to be there, just to know something about them, about their experiences, to find out, what's your mum like, or who do you live with, or how's things at home, just little conversations bit by bit, which John touched on in his episode, and just to trust those things, that the work that we put in there, that God will take what we do, and to entrust it to him, I suppose. Just to turn up and try our best, and hope that something good comes of it.
Absolutely. And I know that youth project remains dear to the hearts of everyone who has been involved in it, and has seen such good things coming of it, and that we'll want to return to that once it's possible again. I wonder if that you have other examples of things that we are actually already doing that you think feed into this mission of racial justice, because of course we don't have to start afresh every time. I'm sure there are lots of things that happen in this parish that feed into that.
I think the music, and that's something that I think is so important that we do. Again, if you look around most of the cathedral choirs or the I suppose the choirs, the children's choirs that will be regarded as, I suppose, the flagship choirs, you'll see mainly white middle-class children, and yet what we're doing in our choirs here is something really, really tremendous. And I think that's where music is so important, because it's not just about the musical skills. I think it does help with people's confidence and gives them all sorts of other sort of skills, and also I think it can often be something that provides people with a real sense of hope as well. So I think that's something in the parish, I would say, that we're doing already. That's something that I think we can be really, really proud of.
I think that a big part of our work with choirs actually is the sort of social opportunities that it offers for people that perhaps wouldn't normally get them. So I'm just thinking, recently, one of our someone who came through the choir as a young person who achieved a scholarship to a very prestigious school because of his because of the things that he'd experienced in the choir. He led out the choir of the Chapel Royal at the National Service of Remembrance at the Cenotaph in front of the Queen. Not just one, but there were two of them, one young black boy and one young Latino boy. And I just think these two boys from this part of Brixton and the sort of schools that they went to would never have had that sort of opportunity were it not for what the choir had offered. So that in itself, I think, is, if we're talking about being an anti-racist church or how we combat racism, just trying to break through that sort of those barriers that people have when it comes to choirs and when it comes to that sort of the social stuff that comes along with it. That's an obvious area where we've put lots of work in. I've only been here for 18 months, but that's been going on for years.
I would just add to that, it's not just the barriers, but the assumptions that come with, because you look a certain way, you can't sing in that way. I think the choirs and the also all the projects that we do around music, so the organ scholarship and the piano scholarships as well, show that actually if you have talent and you're willing to work hard, there is a support network there. There are people cheering you on, whether it's behind a TV screen or actually in a concert in front of you. But also the fact that our clergy, Father Marcus especially, has supported a lot of young people to go out there and achieve their dreams as well. And that's partly of what doesn't matter what you look like or where you come from, what this part of North Brixton is, that there is somebody there supporting you to get to where you want to get to, because you're talented, because you're hardworking, because you're diligent. And that is something that I think should be replicated across the United Kingdom, but also commended to our church as well.
I want to ask what you would say to those who think that talking about racial justice is boring, those who would say that we've had too many sermons about it, that we concentrate on the issue too much.
Nothing is really changing. Small steps, yes, but nothing fundamentally is really changing. The statutes and laws are still there. The fact that last week, another Windrush scandal that was trying to slip under the carpet was still there. So it's like, well, we talk about it and it's spoken about to highlight the injustice. So I would always try and have a conversation to seek to understand how they perceive the issue and situation. If somebody said to me that these sermons are boring, like, why are they boring? I find some other sermons boring, but actually, first of all, I try and get at least a nugget of understanding from it and try and make the change from what the message is coming through. Why do you think it's boring? Why do you think it's not needed anymore?
Can you have too many sermons about God's kingdom? Can you have too many sermons about God's justice? And can you have too many sermons about what the love of God looks like lived out? And I think the answer to that, of course, well, you can't. And it's the same. This is what we're talking about. So, we can't be tired by something like that.
Saying things which are prophetic is never something that's designed just to be popular. I mean, something that Cornel West points out a lot is that Martin Luther King had a disapproval rating of 75% at the time of his death. So in 1968, he had 75 disapproval, which is much worse than he was in 1963. And that's because he pursued a progressive agenda which sought equality for the whole of the country in ways that people felt uncomfortable about. The prophets in Scripture are not popular figures. John the Baptist is a very strange man, as we heard on Sunday. So these things aren't easy to listen to. They're not for entertainment, but it's a declaration of the word and the promises of God.
Great. And finally, I would love to hear if you have any encouragement, any of you, for those who want to stand up against racial injustice, so those who want to be leaders on this issue.
I would say you have to be brave. You have to be brave because sometimes it can be scary to step out against so many different factors, against people, against an institution, against a system that says to you, you should be happy where you are. So you definitely have to be brave. You've got to endure as well. It isn't quick.
But for us, as part of the church, as members of the body of Christ, we are in it together. It's a team effort. We don't have to be alone. We need to be brave in using our voice. But if we can use our voices together, collectively, as the body of Christ, then our message will be far stronger.
I think it's just following on from what everyone else has said about that. That need for that inner strength that can, in many ways, only come through faith, but knowing that God's love is always there, strengthening us each day. Because to step out, to stand up, to face the sort of horrible injustices and the difficulties. I mean, these words don't even describe, what people face is really difficult. And to keep that inner strength and that resolve, I think really is where, remembering that it's in God we find our true selves, and in God we find our strength, and God is our foundation. That then that gives us that resolve to sort of each day think, I can start again. Maybe progress isn't happening as fast as I'd like, but actually this day I've got that strength to start again, and I know that I'm in good hands when I'm in God's hands.
When you work for these things, when you work for justice and for peace and for harmony and the building up of relationships, the building up of people, when you nurture people's vocations and see them flourish as who God's created them to be, you share in God's work. And I can't think of anything that's more encouraging than that itself, that God invites us to this work, and it's our delight and joy to join him in doing it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for joining me. It's been a great conversation, and I hope one that gives us the constancy and the endurance and all that we need to continue in that work with God. Thank you very much to Father Mark, Father Nick, Venessa, and Father Sebastian. I'm very grateful to them and to all the guests from this series for their willingness to speak to their commitment of making St. John the Divine an anti-racist church. And thank you to you for listening and engaging through this Advent series. We hope to continue this work in our church and beyond, so we look forward to joining with you again. Until then, may you and all your loved ones have a blessed Christmas when it arrives.